COVID isolation movies. Do you remember them? We are talking From the Shadows from 2022, also known as The Last Call. And this one is directed by Mike Sargent and stars Keith David and Bruce Davison. And yes, it is a conference call style Zoom meeting movie that we got during the pandemic because of isolation rules and things like this. To be fair, this isn't all that style of movie, but most of the footage that you'll see in this movie is scenes of people on a video conference call. So what is the story? Well, it focuses on this woman and her assistant who are paranormal investigators in the fact that they are kind of there normally debunking things. They are cynics, and there is this case where a kind of cult that was led by Bruce Davison's character have died in a fire, a mysterious fire. Most of the cult members have died. There are a handful of survivors, and these survivors agree to go on this kind of conference call, this video call with this investigator in hopes of uncovering what really happened and kind of clearing their names because they have got blamed for the deaths. So on this call, we effectively get testimony, witness statements, a lot of exposition about the events that led up to this. At the same time, we learn of this kind of other dimension and these kind of shadowy figures that may have come from it, that may be circling our cast. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's get into it. So a couple of things just to remember whilst we're kind of talking about this film. This is a very low budget movie, and B, a film that was obviously restricted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have to bear those two factors in mind when we are discussing this film. So what works in this film? The VFX sequences I kind of liked. The kind of these shadowy kind of figures, of which there are kind of two. We have the kind of the CGI stormtroopery foot soldier ones, I guess you would call, that are all sort of generated by VFX. I still kind of like them. And then we have our main antagonist, who is played by an actor, who I won't say any more than that, but it is an actor who is kind of in prosthetics with kind of glowing eyes and has a bit more agency maybe than these kind of foot soldier ones, and a little bit more of a ideology, I guess you would say. But I like both of these kind of creatures, and I think they're kind of quite well realised, especially in the budget. There are a couple of reasonably good gore shots here. Again, we got to think of the budget, but there is some interaction with characters, you know, in the kind of the same area. Admittedly limited, but there is some, and we do get a couple of decent kind of gore shots and kind of practical VFX in regards to things like scars or wounds or close-up of someone getting it in the eyeball and things like that. So those two things I think are pretty solid. The movie is somewhat kind of lofty in its ideas and ambition. Despite this movie primarily taking place on a video conferencing app, it does actually have quite a scope in regards to its plot. This weird cult that are getting involved in things maybe too mysterious and beyond their control. They've got what it all means. There's certain artifacts, certain procedures. There's actually quite a lot to this plot. I mean, it is all sort of spoken about rather than shown, admittedly. But yes, there is actually a fair amount to the actual plot and the mechanics of what's actually kind of happening to these sort of characters. And, you know, the more describing things. And again, it's more tell, don't show, this movie, because of the restrictions with both budget and COVID-19. But the idea, at least, I think, is kind of relatively solid. Keith David and Bruce Davison, obviously established actors here. Smaller roles, especially Bruce Davison, but when they're on screen, I think they're still pretty good. And there was a couple of actors outside of those two who I think do an okay job. So what doesn't work? And let's just carry on from the acting point there. There are a couple of actors who do an okay job. However, I will say I think the bulk of the cast outside of our unknown actors and a couple of others are actually quite wonky acting, shall we say. The acting here for the most of the cast, not all, but most of the cast is a little bit cringe, to be honest, unfortunately so. The line delivery is very stilted. It feels like very first time job type kind of sort of acting, if that makes sense. Just not believable characters in regards to the way they are presenting their kind of lines of dialogue and things like that. Yeah, so the acting, and I have to say, even though there's a couple of ones that I think are okay, the bulk of them are weaker, and that is obviously makes the film generally seem like the acting overall is on the poorer side. Now, one thing that maybe that this movie couldn't change outside because of the circumstance is this movie is mainly a bunch of exposition. The plot, as I've mentioned, is quite complex in regards to the intricacies of what actually happened in the past and what's going on now. People have got different agendas, they've been hiding things, but it is a lot of telling us what has happened or what is going on rather than showing us, which makes it not as interesting had they showed us, if that makes sense. Now again, I can totally appreciate the fact that this obviously is a movie that was restricted by both budget and the COVID-19 pandemic at the time, but ultimately what we come down to is somewhat of a very exposition heavy movie, whilst looking just like talking heads, just like this, on a TV screen for, you know, an hour and a half or however long it's going on for. It doesn't exactly make thrilling entertainment value, especially when you go into the kind of the ropier acting from time to time as well. There are a couple of budgetary issues that will show through. I actually still quite liked the VFX, but there's no doubt about it that they kind of, some of the kind of these CGI shadow people, you know, they look CGI. I didn't mind them. The only thing I would say with them is they tend to be for show and nothing else, because I didn't really feel they did very much. We have these kind of shadowy figures that appear out, you know, that seemingly, you know, sort of a mass around our sort of characters, but they just kind of stand around not really doing anything, to be honest. I'm assuming it was too difficult to get our live action actors to interact with CGI ghost things that would be put in later on, but it makes them kind of feel kind of pointless. It's really just a kind of a showy thing to put on without really having any context about what is kind of going on in the actual kind of plot, if that makes sense. Only our shadowy figure played by an actor actually really ever interacts with anything. So there is that. And ultimately there's the fact that the bulk of this film is sat at a computer screen looking at monitors, you know, really just talking about what has happened. It gets a little bit on the dull side at times. But again, I do appreciate the idea, at least, behind it, but we have to look at the movie that we've got rather than the movie that could have been had it had better budget and no restrictions. So overall though, I would say it's certainly a well thought out movie. It's just been restricted by circumstance. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. There is still some entertainment value here. I like the visual stylings. I like the idea here of a kind of an investigator who really is coming from a place of cynicism as our main sort of character. So 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.